I'm sure there will be questions to expand on the introductions, but I'm Nick Jimenez. I founded a website that nobody knows about called dademag.com, and on that website lives, among other things, Pan Con Podcast, which is a podcast hosted by the rain-coated man sitting next to me, 8th grade basketball MVP and Ford Bronco enthusiast, alleged chef Michael Beltran.
Chili cook-off champion.
And chili cook-off champion.
Right.
Yeah. And 2-time.
Sixth grade most improved player on the volleyball team.
Right. And also Elvis impersonating Santa Claus.
Elvis, and I won an award for that.
Yeah.
Elvis impersonating Santa
Claus. Is that true?
In the 8th grade. Yeah, that's correct. I was such an incredible
Did you think this would go so deep so soon?
Yeah. Okay. I was an incredible actor in middle school, right? They wanted me to go on to do like acting school. And I was like, no, I want to have friends.
What middle school did you go to?
Oh, so many. I mean,
all the middle schools.
Yeah, I went to so many.
You just bounced around.
I got kicked out of a couple, but I ended at Sunset Prep, and I was there for 2 years. Yeah.
Wait, but isn't middle school like 3 years?
Yeah, well, I got kicked out of the one before, and then they sent me to that one, and then that one kept me. And then elementary school, it was 2 different schools. So yeah, Columbus kept me though.
Yeah,
that's the most important one. Columbus accepted me.
Nice.
They let you explore.
They let me explore.
That's a big achievement.
Yeah, they let me explore there.
Yeah. How about you, Nick? What was your like childhood Miamian school experience like?
School experience? It's like the most Miami question, right? What schools did you go to?
Yeah.
I only went to 2 schools total. So I was from K through 5 at Conchita Espinosa Academy.
Wow.
I don't know what that is.
It's like 3 blocks from Belen, which is where I was from 6th through 12.
Okay.
At Belen Jesuit, where we did much less exploring.
Meant for others.
Yeah, but we did
different type of exploring.
Yeah, exactly.
So we'll just move on from there.
Let's hope your adulthoods are.
For all the young ones listening, they probably don't know what.
They're young ones.
Hopefully,
this isn't Pan Con Podcast, I guess.
All right, got it.
Yeah.
Noted. Well, now that you brought up Pan Con Podcast, let's go behind the podcast. For also the older generations listening, hopefully they can get the reference, right? Do you guys remember Behind the Music?
Yes. Yeah. I did. It didn't hit me when I saw it in the show notes behind the podcast, but now I get behind the music.
I'm like, yeah, I got it.
Behind the podcast.
Yeah. Okay, good. I was hoping you would get the reference. So hopefully everybody listening can get the reference.
And it's just a matter of time before.
And if you're too young, look it up. It's
You
got a surprise waiting for you.
Yeah,
that was a good show.
It was. Now we could do a whole theme, like we could do behind the podcast, making the podcast. Mm-hmm. Where's the podcast now? All that stuff.
No, because that means that.
Pan Con Podcast Unplugged.
I don't know.
I don't know what that. I don't know what that would be, but
I don't know. But that sounds super cool. What was your favorite Unplugged episode? Do you remember?
Yeah, I really liked Jay-Z's Unplugged, even though I don't really like Jay-Z that much. I mean, Erykah Badu, I'm pretty sure, had like a really great one.
Yeah, I remember hers.
I don't know. Those, I think. I mean, the Jay-Z like Unplugged album is like amazing. Really good.
I didn't really watch any Unplugged things.
Yeah.
Or if I did, I don't remember.
If it's not on YouTube, it's not on Nick's radar.
Well, I also didn't have cable until like into high school. So I wasn't watching any MTV things.
Yeah. You were.
Earlier than that.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yep.
You were probably like one of the good kids.
Yeah, I mean, maybe more boring than good. But,
shock.
Yeah.
I'm shocked.
Right. Yeah, nobody was kicking me out of their middle schools.
So coming back to Behind the Podcast, how did, let's start with the name, because that's what fascinated me the first time I discovered you guys was the name, Pan Con Podcast. That is the coolest name.
This is a point of contention.
I've accepted the fact that Nick says he came up with the name. And
You've accepted that I say I came up with it.
And that's fine, and that's cool. Like, we're just going to run with it, you know. It's fine.
The name came from an Instagram, like a sort of offhand Instagram caption that I wrote when we were doing Tea Time with Mike and Mike, which was a podcast that I was helping, produce and whatever. Michael Ortiz, who owns JoJo Tea,
okay,
was doing a podcast called Tea Time with Mike and Mike, which he was doing with Michael Beltran. That's how I meet Mike Beltran.
Nice.
Helping Mike Ortiz with his podcast. And we were recording at Chug's when it was still under construction.
The first one.
To become Chug's 1.0, right? When it was going to be a roughly 1 year pop-up.
Right.
So I posted a picture on Instagram that I was recording a podcast with them, and since they were sitting at the counter of what was going to be the diner, I put that we were serving Pan Con Podcast. And then later on, when the two of us were talking about doing this new podcast, that became like the name. Like as soon as that was thrown out, I was like, what if we called it this? I was like, yeah, obviously. And then I find out later, apologies to the children, I guess I won't say, but I find out later, like maybe a year into doing the podcast, that Mike the whole time thinks that this is like a phallic reference, like a joke on Pan Con Bibi.
What do you mean?
Oh,
it's not. That's never what it was supposed to be. And you said, like, when you went to Cleveland to record with Brett, you actually bring this up in the interview, like, oh yeah, we've got a podcast called Pan Con Podcast. It's a play on Pan Con Bibi.
Well, this is kind of the same thing, right? It's like the same kind of joke.
It's just
I
a
thought
podcast.
it was like pan con pasta.
It's just like a podcast sandwich.
You know
Pan con lechon, pan con vite. That's what my head was.
It's wherever your head's at.
It's
I mean, it's wherever you want to go.
Live your truth.
Yeah, live your truth. That's true. I mean, I think that, but we've accepted that you say you came up with the name. That's fine.
Yeah.
We're going to roll with that.
Great.
It's totally okay.
Great. So that's the story.
That's the story.
Yeah.
The
I love
true
it.
story of how Nick conned me into doing this podcast was we were doing the podcast with Mike, remember?
Yeah.
And then me and Mike were doing a really dreadful job. I mean, the podcast was like 5 hours long each one, not edited, sound was terrible, but we had such a good time. Mike was really into long format podcasts, like very long. So it was cool and it was fun. And then Nick came in to give us some kind of structure. And then Mike moved to New York for, what was it, like 8 months, right?
Something like that. He had a pop-up.
Yeah, he had a pop-up going on in New York. So then we stopped, and then Nick recruited me to do another podcast. And then, whatever.
That we said was going to not be
Long
several
format,
hours long,
right.
and now some of them are 3 hours long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, I mean, if the conversation's good, like, just let it happen.
Yeah, I mean, so I will say, you're saying that Tea Time was dreadful. Tea Time with Mike and Mike, I think it just had a very specific idea of who its audience was.
Well, no, I mean, dreadful is the fact that we had zero structure. We didn't know talk, like our tools, everything. Like it was sound quality was bad. Everything was bad.
But I think it was an example of the kind of podcast where like some people would hear it and think, who on earth is listening to this?
Right.
But it was really intended for a very narrow audience. So Mike Ortiz really, I think, was more interested in other people in the business. Like you were obviously on the podcast, but people like you listening to it and having it be a way that they could feel like they were connecting with him, which I think they were, right? So, it was the kind of 3 or 4 hour thing that, maybe you only stick around for half an hour, but maybe you find it fun enough that you stick around for 3 or 4 hours. And it was, and it was kind of an interesting, like a very loose, very informal marketing thing, like loose and informal to the point that I don't know if you remember, what's the painter guy's name that you had?
Matt Herget when he was doing
Matt Herget was
doing that weird African drug.
Yeah, they were. It was like snorting some kind of weird.
Well, they blow it into your nose.
Yes,
like your friend blows this.
I forget what it was.
Hash like into your nose.
Yeah,
and then it's like supposed to put you on a different plane.
Yeah.
So I watched. I
the
watched
two of us
that,
were there watching. Yeah,
watched that.
And what happened to him? Did he go to a different plane?
I mean, I think they're both kind of always on another plane.
Okay. So they had like one leg on the other side anyway?
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
They were just like going right back completely over there. But they're both amazing human beings. Matt Herget is incredibly talented too.
All that is to say that where Tea Time, I think, was intended for a very narrow audience, Pan Con Podcast is really intended for, not that we're trying to be all things to all people, but we are trying to we're trying to have a little bit of a broader appeal, right?
Right.
You don't have to be in the business. You don't even have to necessarily be into food because it's not a podcast about food.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Although that, takes up the lion's share of what we talk about.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's that. I think that was really what we were trying to.
Yeah, we're not like sipping tea and taking notes.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So it's a little more broad.
I feel seen right now.
No, I'm.
Right, you got tea and notes.
No, I mean, the whole idea behind tea time was like, we're going to drink a different tea and we're going to talk about it and we're going to take notes on it and then people are going to try it. But it was like, it's like you said, it's like a broad marketing thing and it was smart. I mean, the real tea people that liked it and that liked the industry all listened to it. I mean, all 4 hours of it.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's
cool.
super cool.
It's a good time.
Yeah. And then obviously you guys transitioned into, like you said, Pancom Podcast.
Right. Yeah.
So what inspired that besides obviously your friendship?
We weren't really friends when we started.
No?
No. Yeah.
No, we weren't.
No. Yeah, I think when we started Pancom Podcast, am I like, sorry, I'm scratching things off your mug.
No, not at all.
No, I don't want to destroy your mug. Yeah, so we actually met through tea time, but we'd get there for tea time with Mike and Mike. Mm-hmm. That would last like 5 hours. So by the time the podcast was done, we wanted to not see each other anymore. So it's not like we were hanging out.
Sure.
But then when Mike Ortiz left town, Mike Beltran and I get together, and I think it was from there. So like, I don't know, around 2016-ish. Mm-hmm. No, sorry, 2018-ish.
18.
Yeah, summer of 2018 was really when we started to like get to know each other beyond just sitting next to each other while people blew things up each other's noses.
Right.
Yeah.
Man,
you transitioned.
That was a weird podcast.
Yeah.
Man, I remember that.
But I mean, in terms of what inspired it or what the purpose was, so I had started dademag.com in 2016, which is where my confusion was, while I was working editing Cigar Snob magazine,
right?
Which actually their offices, unless they've moved since, are like 2 buildings down.
I think I've seen them.
Yeah. So I started dademag.com just as a way to as a place to put things that didn't have a natural home in Cigar Snub, right? And then over time, on the one hand, it started to develop an audience, but on the other hand, like because it was just such a mishmash of things that I thought would be interesting, I wasn't doing things frequently enough to build an audience that just kept coming back for more of a thing.
Right.
And I didn't want it to just be me, right? Because I didn't want somebody to land on the site and think like, oh, this is just this Nick person's personal blog, I see what you're saying. I wanted it to be like a topically broad web magazine. And I thought like if I build with just me, then it's very easy for it to fall into just being Nick and the things he cares about. So I approached Mike because over the course of the tea time thing, I realized that, we liked a lot of the same things about tea time, and there were things about tea time that we felt we didn't necessarily identify with. So I saw that we had enough in common in terms of how we thought about that podcast and how we might do another one. And that was confirmed, I think, when we started to talk about what this might be.
Yeah. I mean, what did we talk, when we talked about, what did we say it was going to be?
So you never like when I bring this up, but from the beginning, I was... for analogy's sake, using like Bourdain as an example, not because and I get it, like, it's like if you tell, whoever that they're like, but I'm like, as a model, right. Bourdain has all this broad appeal because he has all the food credibility, but he also has these interests that he lets you in on, and so like the Balvenie Scotch did a series called, was it Crafted?
Yeah, that's such a good, what were they, 15 minutes each or something?
Yeah, something like that. Small. And they're like short documentaries about people who make things by hand. And so like, there's one that there's a guy who makes chef's knives, but there's another one where like Anthony Bourdain spends 15 minutes on this guy who's a tailor. Yeah. And he's coming to all these different things through with this like chef's sensibility and like that understanding of, or at least that lens of like craft and culture and what have you.
Yeah.
So I think that, what we're doing at Pancom Podcast is something very similar where like, maybe 50% or more of our guests are in the food industry, but we can also bring on somebody like Ed Reed, right? The Football Hall of Famer, and the conversation that you have with Ed, you're still coming to some of those ideas of leadership and all that.
For sure.
You play football too, but from a restaurant lens.
Yeah, leadership takes form in every industry. And like, football, kitchens, whatever.
Right.
Never really worked in an office, so I don't know.
And same deal with like the artists that we talked to when you're talking with Mario.
Yeah, creativity and then creativity and a different dynamic too.
Yeah.
I think that there's like cooking and food and like everything about restaurants can relate to different types of people from different walks of life. Again, from athletes to creatives like artists, poets, writers, whatever.
Yeah.
Musicians. Because I think that, and then also like we can sit there and chop it up with people that are CEOs for Fortune 500 companies because, we also run a business. Right. So it gives us the opportunity to be like well versed in a lot of things. And then if you're fortunate enough to like carry some, fraction of success in the industry and you learn as much as you can about it, then you can talk on that too. Just like how to deal with that also. So I think it changes, like you just, I think that's why we also became friends because, Nick is worldly. He's got a lot of opinions about a lot of stuff. So it's easy to have a very long conversation with Nick.
Oh man.
Yeah.
That sounds a little bit backhanded. That's fine. I'll take it.
No, it's a compliment.
Sure.
It's a compliment.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? In this day and age, right? Having an opinion, it's definitely a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, I guess. Depends on who you ask.
Depends on who you ask. Yeah, having an opinion isn't always like a great thing. Depends who you ask. I think it's great for everyone to have opinions.
Right.
I think it's great for everybody to disagree. Everyone should disagree more often and then have a conversation and not be mad about it.
That's the key.
That would be like...
having a conversation. That's where everything starts. Yeah.
Yeah, correct.
But back to your podcast. So I was an organic listener, meaning like I listened before I knew you. So
which blows our minds.
You still wanted to meet us.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's crazy.
Wow.
So one of the things that at first, like the first thing that attracted me was the food angle, because food is so integral, right, to everybody, to culture. So the fact that you take food as that first stepping stone into bringing listeners in, and then you expose them to all these other things, like you mentioned, the business or arts, I think is genius and so obvious in a way. Right? Because our first interaction with culture is not even language, it's food. So.
Well, I mean, I think like food is one of the last opportunities for people to sit down and have a conversation without being interrupted.
Yeah.
And I think that that's like a huge value of food is the community that it brings. When you talk about like, breaking bread, you break bread over several different angles or like for reasons, break bread because you have a disagreement.
I just realized that I had turned my mug around and I was depriving you of your break.
No, it's fine.
To have that facing the camera.
I'm about to take your mug away from you because you're gonna break it and you keep like fidgeting it. Yeah, I mean I think that's why food is a good starting point for any kind of conversation. Whether you disagree, whether you miss each other, whether you haven't, I don't know. It's the thing. Yeah. And it's a great point to start at. People always, it's like the age-old question is like, so what's your favorite thing to cook?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I guess if we want to start there and then, we'll go deeper, that's fine. But it's a starting point. And I think that's important. I think that's why food is like a good get for it. I like to think that I push more of the angle outside of food than Nick does, but because and I'm with him. I like talking to food people also, but I think talking to people outside of the industry, like consuming what they understand about my industry and then how it works with whatever they do for a living, I think is also very intriguing.
Right.
I think there's also just the limitation of the medium, right? Like, even if you want to make it all about food, at some point you can only take talking about the food so far if people aren't physically there to experience the food.
Yeah.
And so at some point, if you're just talking about, if it's just hearing people talk about flavors and what have you, then it starts to get repetitive at some point or another.
Well, it's like the weird, you watch a lot of YouTube or whatever, the ones that is just sounds of people just chewing.
What's
shit.
What is that?
So weird.
Mukbang.
Yeah.
Oh, see, I don't even know that.
Yeah. It's just like people with endless hours of people chewing and drinking. And
there's some overlap between mukbang, which I'm totally making up that that's how you pronounce it, but it's like, I think it's a Korean thing.
Mukbang.
Mukbang. Yeah, so mukbang, we're taking this hard left turn here. but mukbang is like this genre of YouTube video that, I guess not exclusively YouTube, but genre of video where it's sort of like ASMR, but the whole thing of it is like watching somebody eat a lot.
Yeah.
And I only recently I discovered this through Devin Braddock, your pastry chef.
Oh yeah, that's right.
She's a big mukbang fan.
Yeah, who's the guy that she always posts? Man, there's one guy that she posts all the time. That he like eats like 5-pound bowls of pasta.
It's crazy. It's a whole thing.
And people just watch.
Yeah.
Okay, my mind is blown right now.
Right?
And how do you feel about this? Have you watched?
I have watched because there's nothing I won't watch.
I have not watched. I don't plan to. But
No, I don't know. That doesn't sound like something I would.
Because I love all the weird. Mike knows this. Like I can't not watch the weird stuff. So like there's such a variety. Like I don't remember any of their names, but there's like one guy who is this like big, obnoxious, like high-pitched voice guy who sits in his car most of the time and just eats a bunch of like maybe fast food and like pretends that it's a review, but you're really just there because you find it like fascinating somehow that this guy's
eating.
And there's another person who I think is hilarious, and I don't know where this person is or whatever, but they do it like on a not a green screen, but like a black screen, and then wear what I assume is like a ski mask or something that just exposes the mouth. So what you're seeing is just like this black screen and like a floating mouth with two little googly eyes on the like upper lip area. So it's like this weird, surreal, like floating mouth eating spaghetti thing. And it blows me away that these things exist and I can't look away when I come across them.
Got it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I can look away.
I'm there with you.
He doesn't even listen to our podcast, so.
I don't.
Yeah. Which is fine. I get it. Like I wouldn't either if I was already there for the conversation.
I listen to parts of a couple just because I need to, but.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
I feel the same way. I have a hard time listening to the podcast that I'm on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't like watching things I'm on, listening to things I'm on.
Yeah.
I agree. I only listen to things because I have to in the course of the edit, right?
Right.
So.
Right.
But it's always uncomfortable. You never get used to the sound of your own voice.
No. It's so crazy how that works.
Yeah. I'll probably listen to this.
Constantly say, oh, I should have said this or should have added that or.
Yeah.
It's you become extremely critical.
Yeah. But that's I also can't help myself there, right? So like I'll probably listen to this just to torture myself and like think of all the things I should have done and said differently. I'll probably set a timer of like how much time was I covering your mug on camera, Yeah, I got that a lot.
Funny is a good way to put it.
Oh my goodness. No, this is good because I all of a sudden don't feel so alone. So back to your podcast. What has been your favorite episode so far?
Man, I don't know. It's been a lot of really good ones. The one with Ricardo is obviously like one of my favorites.
It's Ricardo Paullosa.
Yeah. That's my favorite too. I hadn't heard that one until Nick suggested that I listen to that one, and it's
he's
amazing.
A legend. Yeah. He's just like sometimes you get into a conversation and it just like goes. Mm-hmm. That's how that was. I mean, he's very much like that kind of guy. Mm-hmm. Like you just can talk to him for like hours.
Right.
So intelligent and well-spoken and like actually worldly. So like, it's just, so that was great. I loved the one with Carlos Escanilla.
Yep.
I think Carlos, what he does and what we talked about was like very important. So, basically I wouldn't say all of it, but I'd say like 60% of it maybe is like mental health driven. Yep. And I think that was like probably one of the more important episodes that we've ever done, I think. Famous people are cool. Ed Reed, Brett.
Yeah. Where'd you have the most fun?
Falco, man. Jeez. Wow.
That was, and there was like a catharsis in that episode too.
What a disaster of an episode, but it was so like, I didn't feel like recording that day. And then Falco didn't feel like recording that day. So we had both sent Nick texts like, hey, is this still, like, we're good? Yeah. And then, like, we're good? Yeah.
Are you hoping he would say no?
Yeah. Like, something like got a flat tire or something. And, I don't wish you to get a flat tire. Same. And then, we get there and the first thing that I said was like, man, I really don't want to fucking do this today. Yeah. Like I had no interest in doing this. And Falco was like, me neither. And then we just started drinking a lot. Yeah. And it was like, I don't know. That was a long episode.
Well, and because this was early in COVID. So for both of them.
Early in the reopening of COVID.
Right. So for both of them, the stressors of like all that new stuff was like that. It was right at the time that it was hitting them both hardest.
Well, because it was like a new rule, new rule. Right. So what's in their shows like new rule?
Oh, Bill Maher.
Yeah. New rule. It was like that every day. It was like, hey, new rule. Like, fuck, man, can't we just, I don't know, live? Like, we're suffocating right now. So it was like, it was like, there was a lot of like stress and anxiety and woof. But we had such a good time.
Yeah.
I have no recollection of anything that we talked about at all. All I remember was that we had a good time. So that was great. Obviously, the episodes with Norman were like, amazing. I think some of the episodes that we've done with my staff have been really cool. Some guys have worked with me for a long time. I think that was great. Like Pastelito Papi,
Britt.
Bringing Manny on just recently was really cool.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. There's a lot. I feel like I forget. There's probably a lot of really good ones I don't remember. Me and Nick have done a lot, but just together, I would skip those.
not worth it. I agree with all that. I think the Ricardo one was great. I love the Norman one. It probably stands out more to other people because a lot of that, I'm sure, was conversations that you'd had with Norman already.
Yeah.
But I think that a lot of people who are not Mike and Norman, that's up there for them. Mm. And honestly, I've never been a huge football fan, but I loved the Brett Romberg one.
Man, but Brett is great.
Because Brett is such a good time, and he is like, has no hesitation about any of the NFL filter. Stories. Yeah. Like, even if you're not a football fan, like
you'll
and it's also and it's just like a really interesting look into that world. Like, because I think he's retired. He's not really like in the business of the NFL anymore, and he's married with kids, so he has no problem just like letting loose with all of the all the stories, which is an interesting, very like unfiltered kind of thing that you don't get too many places.
Right. Yeah, Joaquin was great. I mean, all the football guys. Joaquin, Ed obviously was like amazing. So, but Brett, I mean, he still comes to the restaurant often. He's like that all the time.
Yeah,
it's crazy. Like how he was. It's not like a character. He's just like really, just no filter all the time. It's pretty amazing.
That's awesome. Piggybacking off that, what has been like the most memorable thing that has happened through the podcast? An experience, a conversation?
Well, I think from a comical standpoint is when someone brought us shrimp empanadas at 1:00 in the morning.
Yeah, that was just recently. That was when we were recording with Martha Bueno, which was the most recent episode we put out.
But
that one just came out.
Yeah, it was, I was talking shit to him just like for fun, that he wouldn't, ever actually make me empanadas and bring them, and
because it's like a supplier who was saying how good they were.
Yeah, he's a liquor guy. Okay. He's a super nice guy, and he was, one day he was like, I make the best, shrimp empanadas. Prove it,
And then we were in the middle of recording. He showed up with
in chancletas and a tray of empanadas.
like after midnight with a tray of shrimp empanadas.
Wow, this is so good. So I mean, that was great. But like memorable moments, the dinner we did with Norman. Mm-hmm. I think that was cool.
I would say memorable for a whole other set of reasons. So we've done 2 live podcasts, meaning with an audience. Mm-hmm. We did one that was a much smaller thing. It was like an invite only thing. So we invited, the criteria were you needed to have been on the podcast before.
Oh, nice.
You needed to be in the food industry somehow. And you also needed to be a cigar smoker because we had a cigar sponsor. So it was like, we didn't want to take their money and then have nobody smoking after the dinner. Right. And that was cool. That was Mike and Norman, talking for that small audience, and we had a Q&A. It was like a very intimate tasting menu dinner thing. And then we did another one that was a ticketed thing at Maxwell Brothers in Palmetto Bay, which is owned by John Falco, famous for getting drunk with Mike on Pancon podcast, and also owning Lincoln's Beard, and Maxwell Brothers and Strange Beast. So we did this at Maxwell Brothers, and that was a ticketed thing. And it was like 60 or 70 people showed up and bought, like, forgetting any of the content of the podcast. To me, the memorable thing was like being in a room with 60 or 70 people who had bought tickets to go and eat and listen to this shit show of a podcast that we do.
What a beautiful disaster.
That was a nightmare. In the best, it was
a beautiful disaster.
Yeah, I gained at least like a handful of gray hairs over that process.
So will you do it again?
100%. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I'll do that again.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm still waiting on a response from Mike's assistant for a date so we can like plan the thing. But we'll figure it out. But for sure we're gonna do it again.
That sounds so exciting.
Yeah. We need to do it again. I need some money. I gotta sell some tickets.
Got it.
Gas prices went up.
That's right. That's right.
We need to make things happen now. We have to get creative.
Yeah, banco inflation over here.
See, for real. Yeah. Ahorita no hay ni pan. It's like.
That's right.
Aire. Forget it. What has been one that you were nervous about?
Yeah, I mean, I asked him about that because I don't really remember one, but I mean, he made a good point. The one we did with John George. I mean, John George is, I don't know, one of the most historic chefs, I think, in the country right now. I mean, he'll probably influence the next 100 years of food like he's influenced the last, 25. So, that was cool.
And I'll also throw in there, one of the things that kind of blew my mind about that was that his publicist, I'm not saying that John George had listened to Pancon podcast, but his publicist came to us, which, at least to me, that was like, what do you mean, John George? Like, you're approaching us about doing this podcast?
It's very shocking. Yeah, people listen to this podcast.
Right.
Not this one. I'm sure this one.
This one too. I'm shocked every day.
You have multiple lights.
Yeah.
You have a logo.
But that means nothing.
You have
mugs.
Like, I feel so uncomfortable. Like, we don't belong. Like, literally, we
I don't want you to feel that way.
It's a joke.
We're both uncomfortable all the time.
Yeah. Like, we record in essence, like, under a bridge.
Yeah. The lighting might be better under a bridge.
It might be.
Yeah. A lot of street lights over us.
Yeah. I hate lights, man.
I know.
I feel like anyways, but yeah, I mean, it still shocks me that people.
You should have told me this before we started.
He would never tell you. He would never tell you production value.
Oh, I see. Okay.
No, you think that stops me from putting lights? I
No.
put lights.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've resigned so many times from the podcast just because of these lights. But anyways, yeah, it's shocking. But people do, and people seem to like it, so that's cool. We have a Patreon. We're trying to get PD on OnlyFans. Maybe bring in some revenue.
Yeah, PD's my dog.
Yeah, PD's his dog.
I've heard.
Yeah. So PD's gonna get on OnlyFans and
maybe
top tier.
He's a handsome guy.
OnlyFlans. Yeah.
And OnlyFans.
Yeah.
It's funny. Is that a real thing? It should be. OnlyFans.
It is. It's a Twitter account. They do good. They do good work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of sexy flan stuff.
A lot of sexy flans on there.
Okay, I have to look into that. That sounds
Wait, but
amazing.
what was it? Were you not nervous about any episodes? Just me?
Oh no, we never got to me. Nervous.
Yeah. Maxwell Brothers. Come on, let it out.
Maxwell Brothers? No, I wouldn't know. You made me nervous like in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm good at that.
We can get into that story, but
let's do it.
The story is basically, and this was really like, lack of experience on my part with this. So we did this live podcast. There was if you've been in Maxwell Brothers, it's a long, narrow dining room. So we've got a stage set up on one end of it and then people eating. And there was a group in the back of the room that I guess was just talking. And Mike decides to take initiative. And
I like that you're looking at it now as initiative.
No, when we had the conversation, because we had to talk about it. Mike decides, and my first mistake was I had sort of like a hodgepodge of microphones, and my first mistake was giving Mike a wireless microphone.
Big mistake.
Huge mistake.
Don't give me any kind of freedom.
So bad. So he gets up from the table, which has 3 cameras pointed at it.
Yeah, much like this.
Yeah. But then imagine if Mike now picks up his microphone and does the podcast from that corner of the room. Except he's like 70 feet away.
Yeah.
So most of that podcast, Mike is way off camera, and I'm the only one like recording anything. So I can't like leave the mixer and go like put a camera on him and whatever. So I try to explain to him like, hey, I need you to come back to the table. But he is deciding that he needs to manage the room.
That's what I do for a living.
But because this is happening in real time and we're both mic'd up, like I'm not gonna, I can't sit and have like a whole production meeting with you in that moment.
Yeah.
So then I went on a total microphone kamikaze mission because I also had a wireless microphone, and because of the audio setup we had, they were both going into the same jack, on the mixer.
After it's so good.
So he doesn't know this, but I cut off his microphone, and he can't talk. And he's like, "Oh, hey, you cut off my microphone."
broke.
But he doesn't realize. No, he knows that I'm cutting him off.
Okay.
But he doesn't realize that every time I cut him off, I have to cut myself off.
Which is the beauty.
So basically, the two of us
There's poetic justice in there.
So the two of us have. So I've cut us both off and left our guests to do the podcast by themselves, basically.
Yeah, which is, Peter Santamaria and John Falco are beautiful humans.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
You couldn't ask for two better people to be forced into that position.
Oh, I mean, yeah, that's correct.
Yeah,
for sure.
That is.
So I was nervous in the middle of it.
Right.
And if I was nervous in the lead up to it, I think I was more nervous just because I had never done that before, right? Like I'm not an event person.
Right.
Like I don't throw parties. Like maybe I have 5 people in my house, to watch a fight or something.
You throw a lot of parties.
I tell people they can come over and eat my chips.
Nick just did a really big screening of Velocipaster at his house.
Yeah, I have you're invited for the next one if you'd like. It's
definitely. Thank you.
It's it was the first installment of the Shitty Cinema series in Nick's living room or backyard is the name of this event series. And I just show awful movies.
Yeah.
And I'm charging people $10 and then it'll all go to whatever charity,
Oh,
so,
that is really cool actually.
So we showed Velocipaster,
Jokes aside, that is pretty awesome.
So we showed Velocipaster. It's the classic story of a priest who, traumatized by his parents' death, takes a vacation to China and ends up developing the ability to turn into a dinosaur. And
this is a real movie.
Yeah, and with guidance from
it exists.
Yeah, with guidance from his prostitute friend, ends up in a deadly feud with the Catholic Church and ninjas.
Mm-hmm. Ninjas are really worth.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have dinosaurs, Catholic Church, prostitution.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It's got everything. There's nothing this movie doesn't have. The next one will probably be either Rubber, which all of these actually involve a lot of death, which I'm realizing now. But Rubber is a story about a serial killer tire. So it's just like a rubber tire that rolls around and like makes people's heads explode. Or Llamageddon, which is about a llama that comes from outer space and shoots people with its laser eyes.
My vote was for Llamageddon.
Yeah. I mean, they'll both get shown eventually. So I'll make sure that you're in the loop on all of this.
Yes, please. I would definitely like to come support and learn about this awful cinema because this is the whole world I was not privy to. Very interesting.
That's what I do. I open doors to people to whole new worlds.
Now
of
I
shitty
see why Mike said you're so worldly.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Right. Yeah.
It's all coming together, all full circle. So for your podcast, what is your process like? I know for you guys, it's very like easy and fun.
Yeah, process is a generous word for it.
What's the process?
Yeah, do we have a process? No. I mean, I think the difficult thing is working around. And this isn't a knock on Mike. It's working around Mike's schedule, right? Because most podcasts are not dealing with somebody who has all of the demands that Mike has. The fortunate thing is that we can always kind of lean on the fact that so many of your peers keep similar hours.
Sure.
Yeah.
So the process basically looks like roughly once a month, we kind of come up with a laundry list of people we want to try to book. We usually do the same weeknight at night. The idea being that by then it's like, okay, everybody's day is over. We're doing the podcast without the stressors of going into another thing. Also, it means that people can drink, right? So like by the end of the podcast, sometimes everybody involved is hammered, which you couldn't do at noon, right? Like we're not going to do this, and have, 5 drinks. Maybe we will have, 5 drinks and then go into a shift at work or whatever. I'm not going to be productive doing edits at my house or whatever it is. So yeah, we'll book.
That would be a day off.
Yeah, we basically book like a month at a time, and that's it. Like beyond that, there's not much of a process that I could point to.
Nope, none.
Well, what you're doing is obviously working because I enjoy listening to the show.
Thanks.
And so do many other people.
I mean, that's what I hear. It blows my mind every time. Every time
You were walking down the street and you were like, "I love your podcast." I'm like, "What?
Yeah.
Sure. Are you talking to?"
I know he did say that.
Does Lynette have a podcast?
Yeah. How are you talking? Lynette have a podcast? No. Shut.
We do. We love it. It's just it's and I'm sure you've heard this from other people, but it's so easy and fun, but yet you get something valuable out of it.
Well, let me turn it around
like
on you.
What
are your favorite things
from your podcast?
Yeah, like is there a favorite episode or a moment?
Well,
because I'm always curious, like what resonates with people.
The one that you suggested that I listened to.
Oh, with Ricardo Paullosa?
Yeah, that one I've actually listened to now. I'm on my second time around. Yeah, he's pretty awesome. And the way you handle the conversations, yeah.
If there is a podcast worth listening to twice, that's probably it.
Yeah.
He's got a lot of good one-liners in there.
Yeah.
They make you like, man.
Yeah. And we quote it all the time. A lot of references to it.
He's pretty incredible.
I quoted it at least 4 times yesterday.
Did you really?
Mm-hmm.
In what was like a meeting or something?
No, I'd say like 4 or 5 times in the last like 3 days.
Yeah.
There's still one quote that we always say.
Okay.
Which is?
I always butcher it, so you say it.
So Ricardo was talking about a lot of that podcast is about Cuba, as you know, and it was I know because you posted half of it on Instagram,
right?
And Ricardo said that for people who see themselves as living in a Cuban context, Cuba's dead. But if Cuba is in you and you are the context for Cuba, then Cuba is alive. And this was in the context of a conversation about like keeping Cuban culture alive in the diaspora and what have you. So
it came to me because like on Saturday I was hanging out with some friends of mine and I met some random human that is Cuban from Broward, and just talking about how difficult it is to keep the culture alive, you know. And obviously I was not gonna say offended, but you know, I said my piece because I was like, well, I mean, it's just kind of like you're being lazy, right?
I was going to say, do you think it's difficult to keep the culture alive?
No. Well, I mean, yeah, it's not going to be easy for us to keep the culture alive, but we have to believe in keeping the culture alive.
Right.
It's not like, I don't think that it's like an easy, there's nothing easy about it when people have been trying to change it for 50 years. But, you know, and the fact that we've been here for so long.
Yeah.
And, you know, like as generations go, like I was, you know, first generation American, so kids and kids and kids, you know, you get further removed.
Right. I think that's the worrisome part, you know, like when it comes to passing it on. But I feel like here in Miami, if it's going to be any place that would be easy, quote unquote, to do it, it would be here.
Yeah, right? I mean, I guess, right? Like, but also like sensationalizing and cheapening our culture. A lot of people do it for money.
That's a big concern for sure.
You know?
Yeah.
And I don't find it as it's not a concern for me. It's just like, it's what happens because people are more enamored with the idea of making money on the culture than they are of actually like doing right by it. And I think that there's some of both, you know, like you can, you know, be using the culture to your advantage for a concept or whatever it may be, and also be making money, but also like being respectful to it, but you also could be being disrespectful to it. But I think there's, you know, it's our responsibility to at least keep it out there, right? You know, like they were saying like, well, there's not like a ventanita in every corner anymore. I'm like, what? What do you mean? Maybe not in Broward. You know, here there is.
Yeah.
But that's not, I mean, the culture is much more than that, but just saying like keeping that thing alive, you know?
I think there's also an issue of, and it's part of why, you know, aside from being our one of our favorite episodes, it's part of why I think that Ricardo and the one that we did with Rosa Maria are, I don't know.
Well, sorry to cut you up.
Yeah.
The moment, we're talking about moments like Rosa Maria just walked in the middle of the Norman dinner. Remember?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And just like, you know, did her whole thing.
Yeah.
You know, and that was amazing. And that was not planned, you know, but it was at the peak of like,
it was like maybe a week after the protest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it was like, you know, needed to be said and things were said. So I think that was cool too.
So I was going to say, I mean, I think that even like that moment and the episode we did with her and the episode we did with Ricardo, and even some of the stuff that we did on our own, like as unqualified as we might be, we did what we could, you know, spreading awareness with our audience of the protest thing, which, you know, I think there's a lot of assumptions that people make about, oh, well, we're in Miami and so everybody knows these things, but they don't, you know, and we would get that feedback that, oh, you know, I hadn't really engaged with anybody, you know, about these protests that began in July 11th in Cuba. I think that some of those things are the things that, aside from maybe being some of our favorite stuff, are the things that we're proudest of.
Well, it's also I know you're talking about the same episode I'm thinking about when we just talked about that.
In my backyard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was basically talking about like why this isn't covered a different way.
Sure.
By the media, and why it's important for someone to talk about it because no one talks about it because everyone's just scared of, you know, what the repercussion, I guess, would be, is what we said.
Yeah. So, I mean, that on that topic, we were talking about just media coverage of the protests. and the way that the politics of journalism in Cuba work, right? Where like if you're a correspondent in Cuba, you want to be there when the big story breaks, which of course would be any kind of like regime change, or for some people, July 11th came close enough that they like piped up a bit. But yeah, I mean, I think back to what we were saying earlier about the culture and keeping it alive and all that. I think it's also the farther we get removed from Cuba, right? And whether that's a generational thing or a distance thing, because I think that people sometimes, experience something similar, even if you were born in Cuba, but you live, in a part of the country where you're farther removed from it.
Right.
To me, I think it's, I think that what the podcast helps to do when we're able to touch on that is to help address some of what I think is the problem of people not thinking deeply enough about Cuba and what their connection to it is. And I think if your connection to Cuba, and this could be said about any culture, any diaspora, right? But that's the experience that we have is the Cuban one. If you stop at, a few dichos and coladas and espumita and croquetas and,
T-shirts.
And some like, some corny T-shirts or whatever. And like, that's where your connection to it stops. And you don't think more deeply about it than that.
Pot fans.
Right. Then yeah, that's time will kill that. Right. Time and distance and fatigue. Right. Like I this is a perfect example. All these protests that happen, like I've personally been kind of disappointed. Not in anybody in particular, and I think part of it is that, very well-intentioned people sort of only go as far as, okay, we just got to mobilize people to get out into the street and to, chant and march and what have you. But if you don't give them something deeper to touch and feel and hold and do to get some fulfillment out of it, then anybody, and me included. I happen to have been in positions, before we turn and we can talk about it if you want, but before we turn the mics on, I was talking about some of the activism that I was doing. That's part of why I'm still engaged all these years later, because I happen to have been in positions and known people that I had avenues to connect with it in a very deep sort of way and to engage with the issue much more deeply. But if it was just that every so often I was supposed to go out and chant in the street, like, I'd get tired of that. And if I didn't see the results...
Well, because there's no result from that, right?
Right. Yeah. Or if there are, you don't see them. Right.
I think it's like what we talked about in the mini-sode that we're going to release very soon is like, when there needs to be some kind of change, but the change needs to be planned and it needs to be more thoughtful, because banging pots and pans and, hitting the streets and going to Versailles and having coffee and saying that we're angry has not worked, and it's been a lot of years. So we need to approach this thing differently, and it's cool. Like I love to see. I mean, I don't love to see the fact that people are angry, but I like to see that people mobilize and stuff.
There's a place for it,
right? I think we just need to think about this differently. Like, there's a reason why I wear this T-shirt everywhere I go. There's a reason why I do what I do. There's a reason why Nick does what he does. Thoughtful change. And just like slow and steady pressure, people will feel that eventually. And there's a reason why I don't work with certain brands. There's things, and even if it's just a small thing, that small thing could balloon into something huge, right? And, people ask me all the time, like, what's your goal? Like, I don't know what my goal is. My goal is to open a great restaurant, to, nurture a great staff, build a company for people like me. But after that, because, I think I'm blessed that we have that and we have the makings of more. After that, the goals have to change. You have to think like bigger. And for me, a bigger thing is like, how can I impact, keeping our culture alive and making a difference long term. So I don't even know how did we get here? This is very punk.
No, it
doesn't matter how we got here. We're here now.
Yeah, I was just talking about people thinking about their connection to Cuba and its significance more on a deeper
level.
Right? Yeah. So. And it goes back to, what are our favorite things? I think aside from being our favorite, I think some of the stuff that we've done on that subject is among the things that we're proudest of.
Yeah.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, we got a lot of, when we did that thing, that was one of our most viewed things on social media. But again, it just goes to show that there's no media that really talks about it, right? They'd rather talk about like there's a cat stuck in a tree or some dumb shit like that. Like they don't want to talk about the stuff that actually like impacts humans, because I mean I'm sure they do, but like this one specifically because it doesn't really impact them right now.
Right.
But you know it's impacted us for a long time. What is it that Vicky said? The children of the lost, right?
What's that?
That's what Vicky said, right? We're the children of the lost.
I thought you said that.
No, they said that.
That was her thing?
Yeah. They, Vicky and Vanessa, that's what they said. I just ran with it.
Okay.
I've kept saying it. But,
got it.
Right.
You know, like they're okay with us being lost.
Oh, for sure. It's convenient.
People are okay with us being lost because sooner or later we're just gonna, you know, maybe our kid will be like, I don't even know what a cortadito is. I'm just gonna get this venti latte.
Right.
From shitty Starbucks coffee, and I'm gonna be good.
I think again, not to like beat over the Ricardo episode, but one of the things that he said there, I think resonated with me, and I think was an idea that if more people were conscious of it, they would it would draw them into connecting with this thing on a deeper level. And I'm paraphrasing, but the way that he put it was roughly that the experience of or the connection to Cuba gives people a relevance that very few people ever get to experience, right? Whether it was that you were born there or you were shaped by the experience of people who left or whatever, you know, more than any flag waving or any, you know, coffee stirring or whatever, there's this connection to the issue of like what happens when your freedoms are taken, what happens when something modern in every sense, right? Like in the technological sense, in the infrastructural sense, in the freedom and recognition of rights sense gets flung back into the Middle Ages.
Right.
To know what that is and to bring that into your interactions with the world and with other people and with your business and with your colleagues and with your family is to bring something to those interactions that other people maybe don't because they're not conscious of it. And I think that if more people, if more Cubans and Cuban Americans understood how fulfilling it can be to take that with you into those things. It doesn't mean you have to be an expert or you have to like go get yourself a PhD or what. I don't have one. Like I barely got my bachelor's. But you know, to engage with the world that way and have that be something that's sort of built into how you do things and how you want to make yourself and the situations around yourself better, you know, and it informs the way you do everything and the way that I do everything. And I'm sure the way that you do everything, like I don't think it's a coincidence, right? That people who give this much of a shit about Cuba are like putting microphones in people's faces or like, you know, advancing the culture of Cuban food. It's because somewhere, even if you weren't thinking about it this way, even if it's not like written in your notes when you were planning Miami Lit, there's something about talking and being public and putting your name and your face on opinions and engaging with people and engaging with ideas in a way that you couldn't have if you were still in Cuba.
No, for sure.
And even that, right? Even that is part of what I'm talking about of like moving it beyond some of those like very superficial things.
How do you keep that spark going when it comes to like, you know, focusing on Cuba in that way, in such a deep, meaningful way? Because it feels like every time like we get a step closer, we take two back, and it's so discouraging. I know for me, sometimes I'm like, okay, I need a break. I can't take any more disappointment.
I mean, that's how they win.
It is.
That's how they win. I mean, it's a long game, right? I mean, their thing is a long game. They just suffocate you into just giving up. You know, for me, like I think the motivation always has been, and this is with my food too, like, you know, my grandparents sacrificed a ton. So I think that there should be someone in my family that sacrifices a ton for more, you know, and I feel like, you know, that's kind of the road that I've taken, and it's an everyday thing. It's there's days that, I mean, we talk about this all the time. Like there's days that it's like exhausting, you know, but if you feel like your life has that purpose, then you just do it. Like I think that their way of doing it is just by like quieting, like hushing the crowd, right? You know, keeping them quiet. And they have ways of doing that in that country. They don't have ways of doing that here. which is why we have power here. You know, we have an ability that they don't, which I would be damned if my grandparents gave up everything that they had for me to have the ability that I have to use my mouth.
Yeah.
And I use it a lot, you know, to not take advantage of that, or to, you know, give me the opportunity to be creative, to be free.
Yeah.
Creativity is freedom, you know.
For sure.
Using your voice is obviously freedom. And that's why, like, I could disagree with 99% of what you're saying, but you're free to say it, so say whatever the fuck you want.
That's
don't
how
care.
I feel. Yeah.
You know, like, I don't care. I don't, like, there's a bunch of dummies I pass in the street every day talking all kinds of craziness, and I'm just like, cool, man, you do you. Like, that's all I can tell you is you live your life.
Yeah.
You want to carry a big sign that says something really ridiculous and dumb, you go ahead and do that. What does the kids say now? You do you, boo.
Yeah.
Just do it.
That's what they say.
Yeah.
I think there's also, when you engage with it more deeply and when you're more, call it aware or connected to the issue, I think you also see details that that make it possible to measure the impact of some of what you're doing, right? Like it's impossible to, again, if your engagement is, you know, every so often when there's a major story in Cuba, I go to Versailles and I bang pots and pans. Again, there can be value for that. Like there is value. It's not that shouldn't happen. But until you go a little deeper, if that's where it stops, and your whole thing is like, you know, singing Ya Viene Llegando and Cuba's about to be free, and then it's not free, of course, that's very disappointing.
Yeah.
But if you take a few steps deeper, right, and now you know the name of, say, a dissident, and you participate in some kind of a campaign that maybe it's that campaign puts pressure to get them released a month earlier from prison, or you take a step deeper and you participate in a good example, and not to point to ourselves, a lot of people did this, and I think that it was the effort to pay for recargas to keep Cuban cell phones connected on the island. I think that part of why that caught on so much, aside from the fact that it was a point of consensus among so many Cuban Americans, like nobody disagreed that there was value there. Whereas, like, you know, some political question of like opening relations or sanctions or whatever, like those were more controversial. But this of like, should Cuban cell phones work or not work? There was no disagreement.
It's a no-brainer.
But it was also that it had a number attached to it, right? That you could wrap your head around, that you can't with some of these other more superficial things. Right. So, okay, we've collected $1,000. That's so many Cuban cell phones. And it gives you this sense of like, oh, okay, I, you know, even if it's just giving money, like, okay, it took me X number of hours to earn that money and it impacted X number of Cubans. That is fuel. And I think that what we lose sight of is that, you know, and maybe because we are not unique, because there are other, you know, call them ethnic or national groups that experience this too, but the Cuban thing is defined by this political cause.
Yeah,
right?
I mean,
like
all of us, it's safe to say, we're not sitting here because we wanted to.
Right.
We were,
Like,
our families
Well, we never had the
to fled.
freedom to want to do it.
Exactly.
But they had, our people had to do it.
But in a way that isn't necessarily true for other people. I mean, think about it. We've been talking about being Cuban this whole time, and it's all been about like doing things for Cuba. Mm-hmm. There's a discernible project. And what I think we lose sight of sometimes is that the rules of a project don't change. You don't approach this podcast. You don't approach your business. I don't approach, you know, dademag.com in a way that I never concern myself with measurable results, you know, or with small victories. It's not like you don't go into opening a restaurant and say like, okay, yeah, I'm going to do this restaurant. And if tomorrow I don't have, you know, a Michelin star, you know, and $1 million in my bank account, then it's been a failure. Like, no, there are all these small steps. Yeah, there's intermediate steps that you take to get there. And I don't think that we treat it that way very often either, right? Like we in this very broad sense, like it's a lot of like Cuba's free or bust. Like that's great as an end goal, but if we can't identify the intermediate steps, then people will burn out. The way they do anything else in your business. If you don't give people intermediate steps, point. People will burn out. And I think that we sometimes delude ourselves into like the idea that it's, you know, free Cuba or bust. That's fine as an end goal, but you got to have mile markers.
Yeah.
So that the people who are on the bus with you, like, don't jump off because like, when are we going to get there?
Yeah. yeah, this thing has no destination.
Right.
I'm gonna jump ship.
Right.
Yeah, it's a tough one. It's a tough one, but luckily, people like you mentioned Vicky and Vanessa, and so many others keep that going because it's difficult. It's a hard thing to take on. Something that's been going on for years and years and years, and it's degraded the culture and the society down to nothing almost.
There's such a good example though of how engaging in the issue deeply comes with some of the fulfillment that I'm talking about, right? Like they didn't necessarily set out, maybe they did, but they didn't necessarily set out to do some of the things that they're doing because, we want to give ourselves a mile. But by virtue of, say, doing Amparo, right? Once you're doing Amparo, because you went that deep, now there's a number of tickets. And now you're there and you're seeing who was exposed to a story and you see people who had never heard this or that, and you see the change in them in a way that until you go that deep, you don't see, and you don't get that fulfillment. And that for them, I'm sure I know them well, that is fuel for them.
For sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Like that's what keeps you going. Yeah. So to answer your question, I think that's what it is. Like, I think you have to dive deep to get that fuel.
Because really connect.
Yeah, because nobody's paying you to be Cuban, right? So your fuel is not going to be money. Your fuel is not going to be, fame. Because what are you going to be, famous on Mega or something, right? Like, the fuel is that fulfillment that you have to be able to measure the way that you would with any other project.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of value. I mean, and the world doesn't really take value in that sense much anymore, which is like feeling fulfilled. Mm-hmm. I've never once taken a job for money because I want to find something that fulfills me or challenges me so that one day it can fulfill me. Yeah. I think that the Cuba stuff, it's more of like I think we've pushed it as much as we have, and we will continue because it's something that I feel like fulfills us, as like gives us purpose long term. It's gonna be a day I'm gonna stop cooking, right?
And it's also having measurable things tells you what you're doing wrong and what you can fix. It makes you less aimless. Like if you can see when something has failed, or if you're doing a play and nobody shows up, or people leave you, bad feedback, or nobody subscribes to your thing.
Right.
It doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong. Like maybe you're so committed to the concept and you should stick with it. But there's a feedback loop there that you don't get. That also fuels something. It gives you a sense of you don't feel helpless. And when you're that deep and you have some kind of a project that you're a part of, then you have that.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And we're lucky that people like you keep that torch going.
Oh, you do.
Because, little by little, right? I'm trying to do my part. I approach it from a different standpoint because I told you before, I was born there. So my relationship with it is a little bit fragile, traumatized, all those big words. So I sometimes have to step back just for personal reasons. But then, it's time to jump back in because it's a big thing.
Yeah.
I mean, although, like you mentioned, your grandparents, like all our family suffered so much. Mm-hmm. It's like, when is it going to end? When is our day coming? And it's hopefully we're closer than before. To bring it back to the podcast a little bit, because that got deep. That got deep real fast. Any advice for people that are considering starting their own podcast?
You want to take that one, or
advice?
Words of wisdom.
I don't know. Like, I looked at this in a certain way. I'm sure we both looked at this very differently, but I looked at this as for a certain thing. Like, like I said before, I don't really do things. I don't take jobs for money, right? I wanted to. For me, the idea of Pancon Podcast, day one, and it's morphed some. I think even from like Tea Time, when we were doing Tea Time with Mike and Mike, was an opportunity to highlight humans in the industry that I feel like the media does a poor job highlighting, because I don't feel like there's very many people who care about food in the city, at least that write about food. Very few. So if I had an opportunity to talk about someone and get more in depth than, like 3 paragraphs and talk for a couple hours, and it showcases that person's like thing, then I feel like I was doing good for the world and for my industry and for my community, right? So that being said, like I didn't get into this to be like, well, we're gonna make a ton of money on ads, and we're gonna get sponsored by like Krispy Kreme, which would be great if they ever. I mean, I would love that. But you know, I think that that's the thing. You know, do it because you really want to do it and you have something to say and like you love it, but don't do it because some kind of ulterior motive. Because just like anything that's media driven, and Nick can talk on this much more than I can. I mean, it's tough to make a buck.
Yeah.
You know, so I feel fortunate that we have sponsors. I feel fortunate that there's people that actually listen to the stuff that we do. I never expected that. And I never expected I mean, I know Nick did, but I never expected for there to be like people who wanted to pay for ads and do things like that. I was like, you know, we're just going to talk about food, and maybe we'll bring on people that like food and people that love Miami and people that love the industry and people that just, I don't know, want to talk about something roundabout way. And then we can highlight them and what they do in their story. If we did that, then that's great. I think that like it's a contribution to the world in my mind.
Definitely.
Hopefully. Now, my advice is to go into it with like a good, like very honest and open thought process like that. And, you know, if it knocks and you make money, that's cool. It's a lot of work, 100%. Like our podcast does not exist without Nick for sure. Cause it's just like, I just talk pretty much. Right. I hope you put shit away sometimes.
Like cut things out?
No, like put the equipment away.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
But you know, like it's tough. It's a lot of work. It takes time. I think, you know, even for I'm sure he would agree. Like in the 2 years that we've been doing this, right? Mm-hmm. 2 years, there's been days like, fuck, I don't want to do this today.
Yeah.
You know, but consistency is key. Also, being consistent is huge. You know, staying true to like your motto, I think, is huge. And our motto is chaos, so which is fine. It's perfect.
Easy to stay consistent with.
Yeah, it's very easy for me to stay consistent with. I think it's controlled chaos, but it's fine.
That's life, though.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah. Sure. You know, so I think it's like consistency is key. Staying true to your motto is key. You know, and like going into it for the right reasons. You know, I don't know. There's like a niche for everything. Nick watches mukbang. So, I mean, like I said, I
don't watch that much mukbang.
There's something for everybody.
Yeah.
You know, if you want to talk about Precious Moments dolls, you do that. If you want to talk about food, you do that. If you want to talk about croquetas, you do that. I don't know. It is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, and for a little bit of context, the idea with dademag.com was always to do something that was very much from here, but not for here. Right? So we've never set out to be a local podcast. We want to be a podcast that's from Miami, but that people anywhere can come across and take something from. And the same goes for everything else that lives on the website. And that is for me the vision that I've been committed to all of this time. I transitioned to doing this full time just before the world turned upside down. So we've had like a rougher slog of it, and now is when we're kind of coming out of some of that. As far as advice, you know, I talk to a lot of people who come and ask me about the podcasting thing. Mm-hmm. I might tell them they should come and talk to you because this setup is a lot slicker.
Oh, no.
A lot slicker than what we're dealing with.
I'll take that as a compliment.
No, that's exactly what it is. But I think that the best advice that I could give anybody is, you know, partly what Mike said of like commit to the concept.
Yeah.
Because I think the minute that you try to adjust to something that you haven't bought into completely because you think other people might be into it, you're not going to be doing it well enough for them to be. If your audience is more into the idea than you are, it's not going to be compelling to them. And then the other thing is, you know,
that was well said, sir.
And not letting the perfect be the enemy of forget the good, just not letting the perfect be the enemy of it existing. And this is to me, I forget who I was talking about this with recently, but you know, I've even from when I was a little kid, like whether it was high school newspaper or earlier than that. I don't know if I've ever told you this, but when I was in like elementary school, I used to either go to or watch Heat games, and then I would like do a write-up on the game as if the Herald wasn't doing one the next day.
Like a review.
And like I would convince
Never told me that.
my idiot classmates to buy them for like $0.25.
Look at you,
yeah.
entrepreneur.
But I mean, more so than the entrepreneur thing, because I'm not I guess technically I am, but I'm an awful business person.
Awful.
But the thing that I've always done, even since I was a little kid, and so now I have the benefit of being very comfortable with this, is putting my name on my work and having it out there in public for everyone to see. And I think that's something that Mike and I relate with each other on too, is that, you know, he's very much the face of his company, and every plate that goes out, you know, effectively has his name on it.
Right.
And I think that if you let the pressure of that and concern over what the feedback is going to be get to you too much, then you never get to the point where it's out there and you can adjust and grow in public. But if you're going to do a podcast, you can't podcast privately. Yeah. Right. Like you have to be comfortable with the idea that people are gonna see the best and the worst of your work, or that they'll think that what you think is your best, they think is your worst, or whatever. And you just have to get comfortable with like your name and your face and your ideas being out there for people to see. And that can mean any number of things, right? Like maybe people have thoughts about how you do an interview. Some people might love it. Some people might not. Some people think it's fun. Some people, and it's the same with us. My mom hates this podcast, our podcast. I'm sure she'd like yours.
No.
She hates this podcast.
Why?
Podcast. She doesn't like that we curse on the podcast.
Oh, I see. Okay.
She's also not much of a podcast person, but like even I'll listen to it because it's my son's podcast. Like she does not.
Same. My mom's same.
Yeah. My dad's a little more into it. It's the same podcast. They're in the same household. You know, so, but you've got to get comfortable with like that. Not everybody's going to be into it.
That's a really good point, because the path to perfection can be hindering, you know?
Right.
Well, I mean, it could be paralyzing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And it's also not a novel, right? Like for this to work, you have to do it on a very regular basis. Nobody can do the perfect podcast every week. In the same way that like if you're a newspaper journalist, right? Like you're not going to write, you know, you're not going to win a Pulitzer every 48 hours. Like you just keep doing it. You keep doing it and doing it and doing it and doing it until, you know, and every once in a while you hit on something. You know, not every episode we've done is gold.
What?
You know, we're like, and some of our worst stuff, the benefit part of why I think we are still doing this after so much time is that I think that we almost always have fun with it.
Sure.
Some of the ones that we have the most fun with are our worst ones.
For sure.
I think. Like I personally, I have a hard time listening to the episode we did with Burger Beast.
Oh man.
It goes on forever. It's not Seth's fault. I love Seth. It's our fault.
It's definitely his fault.
Sure, fine. It's all Seth's fault. It's all.
He's not here. Let's blame him.
Yeah. It's all Seth's fault.
Blame him to his face. But ask him one question, he goes 6 different ways.
That's true. But we gotta reel him in. But reel him in. But my point is that, like, you know, I guess that would be my third bit of advice, is that make sure that it's something that you enjoy doing, because you're not. I mean, maybe you will, but you're probably not gonna find other fulfillment from it immediately.
Right. For sure.
Right. So.
No, immediately no.
It's definitely going to take a while, right? Like, how long did it take for you guys to feel like, okay, finally this is a real thing, it's its own entity, you start to see some sort of what you would feel would be return? I don't mean that monetarily, but like in fulfillment or in whatever.
That happened
other
pretty
way.
quickly.
Oh, fulfillment wise, this is day one.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, like our first podcast was like, it knocked. It was like a big topic podcast.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. You know, a local chef got called out for wearing like Proud Boy stuff, and it was like a thing. So we talked about it, and that, you know, that was at a time that it needed to be talked about. So, and then the first podcast with a guest was with one of my very good friends and now chef within my company, Chris Hughesby. You know, like the fulfillment was fast. Yeah.
That's awesome.
I think the other stuff, like, do people listen? Like, I don't know. I don't look at metrics and stuff.
I think on that side, it was like relatively quick. And that's because of Mike. Because people already cared about you. Like they were interested because they knew Ariete, because they cared about you and your work, and they were interested in what you had to say. You were already somebody who, like, whenever Mike had things to say, at least about the restaurant business, they were already interested because he's always been outspoken. He just hasn't always had some idiot showing up to his restaurant every week with microphones. So when that idiot showed up, with microphones and now a light that he loves.
The light.
Yeah. now that that's happening, right, it's... but I think the fact that we had this like group of people that already knew him and already cared and I knew it would be interested helped to kind of jumpstart the thing.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, if we want to talk about like the business of it, Mike brings to the thing a credibility in some sectors that matters there, right? Like whether it's people who supply your restaurants or people who know your food or whatever, it's not a coincidence that like we were able to work with when we did that private dinner with Norman for an audience of like 15 people. That for Pan Con Podcast, we're dealing with Courvoisier, San Pellegrino, D'Artagnan, Aganor Salif cigars. Like to be working with those 4 brands right out of the gate.
That's so exciting
for an audience of 15 people. I don't think would have happened if it was just like me doing a podcast. I think it's because Mike is involved that people give a shit. So, and similarly, like I brought relationships from 7 years in the cigar industry that those people knew my work product, right? So those people trust the content even if they haven't heard the podcast. And there's a reason why some of those people have gotten involved as sponsors or, whether it's buying ads or sponsoring events or whatever. So I would say, I mean, I guess I'm just piling on advice, but I would also say, like, if you are not already podcasting, you're doing something else, and you should think about whether it's the talent that you employ in doing what you do now or the relationships, like, how can you bring that in a way that doesn't mess with the concept? Like, how can you bring that into what you're doing? Yeah,
transition it.
Right. There's no reason to start from zero. Like, unless you're an infant, you are not at zero. There is something that you bring to the table.
That's true. Is there a topic that you will, like, that's a big no-no for you? Like, you don't want to go there? Or
for me, no, but I mean, maybe for you.
I mean, I guess that there's like a couple, and really the only time that I feel like topics, I don't want to talk about them, because it's not that I don't want to talk about them, but anything I feel like could affect my business, I won't talk about. And it's just simply because I'm responsible for a lot of people.
Of course.
Like, it's not it's a Mike Beltran show. It's the Ariete Hospitality Group. So, I have 150 employees, and my job every week is to keep them, employed.
Yeah.
So I think it really all just depends, but I don't think that there's anything specific. There's things that I don't want to talk about because I feel like it's not worth it. And I feel like, especially like in certain dynamics of like who you're talking to and what you're talking about, like it benefits them more than it benefits you. And it's like, like if you're sitting there talking to like David Chang and Joe Rogan about like a really big topic, like, cool, because like now everyone's got something to lose.
Right.
And I think that that's very important. Everyone's got to be on the same playing field in order to say like, okay, cool, we're all willing to take this jump together. Fuck it, let's just do it. So.
Right. To transition to Dade Mag, so the umbrella, right? If I understand it correctly, that's home to Pan Con Podcast. How was that born?
So
you touched on that a little bit at the beginning.
Yeah. So I created that website in 2016, just as a home for things that didn't really fit in my day job at Cigar Snob. And the first thing that I put there was really the thing that drove me most to like, okay, I have to transition to podcasts. It was a long feature story about this guy named Frank Romanowski, who, do you live around here, or were you working around here before in this area?
Well, yeah, I lived in the Gables.
Okay. Yeah. So you might have even seen him around. He was this homeless guy who was selling flags on the street. So he would a lot of times be like at the overpass on Bird and the Palmetto. I would see him closer to my house in Kendall. Like, he'd be all over the place, and he was always selling flags on the street. And I passed him a number of times, especially like around lunchtime, that I would be with coworkers and we'd be going to and from a restaurant. And then finally, like at the time that I was starting to think about this website, I see him and his flags closer to my house. So I pull over and I get off and I like talk to him. And I ended up writing a story about a day that I spent with him as he did his whole flag thing, and it's one of the things even that I'm proudest of that's been on that website. It also took forever to do, right? Because I wasn't what I wasn't doing was just like, here's a conversation with Frank. It was, I treated it like if, some magazine was paying me, right? And I went to multiple sources and I did the whole thing, my journalism is my background from college. So I also it's difficult for me to do things halfway.
Disengage.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So that was the first thing that went there. And then I've had other, Joe Cardona wrote a story. I don't know if you know him. He's the documentarian who made Celia the Queen, Miami Bohème, a bunch of other stuff. And he wrote a piece about disco and dance music and its history in Miami. And so eventually I just sort of transitioned to, okay, I'm going to do podcasting because it was just the easiest way to go from, not to say that it's easy, but to go from recording an interview and then by tomorrow or the day after, this can be out in the world.
Yeah. It's a much simpler process.
Exactly.
For sure.
And when you're just one person, that not even necessarily that simple, but the workflow makes it so that you run less risk of going a month without anything new going up on the site.
Right.
So I transitioned to that, and then, and like I said, I ended up hooking up with Mike, and Pan Con Podcast kind of became the cornerstone of the website. Then we've tacked on another podcast called Step Into the Sandbox, which is hosted by David Berjano from Beyond the Agency, and that's all conversations with creatives. And we're doing a third podcast that Mike gets a big kick out of just the idea of its existence.
The Liberated Podcast.
The Liberated Podcast.
With your host, Nicolas Jimenez.
Right.
Coming this spring.
Oh, I'm going to use that.
So you'll be hosting it?
Yeah. So actually,
that's exciting.
Before Pan Con Podcast,
do the intro. Yeah, I just want to do that.
Yeah.
Good.
Before Pan Con Podcast, there was actually the Dade Podcast, and I kind of let that die when we did Pan Con Podcast because it no longer made sense to have dademag.com, the Dade Podcast, and then this thing. In my mind,
I see. Yeah.
In my mind, it was no longer like there's one podcast for the whole thing.
Right.
So that's already out there in the world, and there's like maybe 10 interviews that I did that were a part of that podcast. And so I'm sort of rebranding it to be narrower in scope topically. It'll all be conversations about liberty. So in the political sense and very loosely defined. Okay. I've never been shy about saying like I'm always the most libertarian person in the room.
Right.
And so, case in point, the first one that I recorded was with Martha Bueno. And we get into those topics,
but that's not the one that just came out.
No, that was Pan Con Podcast.
So it's
her as a guest on the Liberated Podcast is much more narrowly about the topic of liberty. The tagline that it will have when it comes out, because I'll probably be releasing it later this month, and that'll be the first episode out, is that it's conversations about how we understand secure and exercise freedoms. And that can be any number of things, right? Like maybe you'll be a guest, right? And there's a freedom to what you're doing here, right? Of like striking out on your own. And it's that as much as it is the political, philosophical.
Right. Freedom in every sense of the word.
Right.
That's okay. I'm looking forward to that.
Cool.
That's exciting. Very, very cool. So let's turn a little bit to Miami culture.
Cool.
I always assume people feel the same way I do, but you guys tell me. So growing up here, it was always that, especially when you travel somewhere, oh, you're from Miami, and you get like the side look, like, what would you live there for? It's just flip-flops and like South Beach. But
cool.
We know, was that your experience?
Cool story, bro.
Did you get flip-flops in South Beach?
I mean, I lived in Virginia. They thought...
They thought you were cool?
Did they think I was cool?
No, the fact that you came from Miami.
Some people must have.
Maybe some. I mean, more it was just like... I experienced a good amount of racism in Virginia. So, like, I wouldn't jump and say that, to your face, they thought you were cool. But when you turn around, like, not so much. Yeah, I mean, I guess I got some of that. Like, people don't really know that Miami's not South Beach. And the Miami Dolphins don't even really play in Miami. They play in Davie. Stuff like that. So, yeah, I mean, sure. They just don't know. Like, Miami is just what you see on TV, which is like palm trees, bikinis, cocaine, Al Pacino.
And there's just so much more.
Cocaine.
Right.
Fly, pelican, fly. Like, it's just like, my grandparents, they They used to make clothing. They didn't sell cocaine. Thanks. Did y'all get over here by like selling drugs? No.
You don't get here by selling drugs. You sell drugs once you're here.
Right. So y'all didn't run none of
how
them,
that works.
Y'all didn't run none of them boats with all them speed boats with all the cocaine? No, we didn't. Really? So how'd y'all get here? We just came. Yeah, we just came. So, I got some of that, but it was like different context. It's those movies, again, sensationalizing like the bad parts of culture.
Right.
It's almost like, I love it when it's like, again, middle America, and there's like, yeah, Cubans, they do a lot of cocaine. I'm like, really? Have you been to the Bible Belt and see how many drugs happen there? Is it just us down south? Is that right? That's cool.
We didn't even know what that was.
Yeah.
Till we got here. What are you talking about?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that's true. But, just for them, it's just a different thing. Yep. They think we all do cocaine. At least when I was in Virginia, it was like, so, do you sell it? Like, no. You have any? No, man. What the fuck? I don't understand. So.
Oh man, how old were you when you were in Virginia?
18. I got there when I was 17, 18, 19, 20.
That's a tough age.
Yeah, I was in college.
Yeah.
He went to where'd you go to
Missouri,
Wisconsin?
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, Missouri loves company, as they say.
Right.
Perfect state for you.
Yeah. So I was in Missouri 4 years, and then I lived in Wisconsin about 3, give or take.
Nice.
So yeah, my experience was a little different. Missouri and Wisconsin are not like deep South Klan meetings or whatever. At least not that I'm aware of, or that I was aware of at the time. But yeah, people have their ideas of what Miami is and isn't, and even if they've been here, very few people leave Miami Beach.
Yeah, that's true.
So, but it was never something that was necessarily uncomfortable. I think the being Cuban was more a source of discomfort than being from Miami, right? Because I was always very like engaged in all the activist stuff, and I think one of the things that I think makes Miami unique is maybe not unique, but different from a lot of other places is I tend to say that we have like a very casual relationship with race and ethnicity, in the sense that whatever flaws everybody tends to think that the grass is greener on the other side. But my experience being away from here is that comparatively, Miami has so many of all of these different groups that they start to lose their significance in the sense of like liking and disliking people.
Yeah.
Right.
Like so many Venezuelans, so many Colombians, so many Cubans, so many Nicaraguans, so many Haitians that like yeah, maybe you have some preconceived notions or whatever, but then I would go to Missouri, and even among Hispanics, right? Very few of those people came from places where they had ever met, a Cuban or a Puerto Rican or it was so many Mexicans and Central Americans. And so even among like the minority groups, entre comillas, like I would encounter, I would say to the extent that there was any kind of like, let's call it bigotry, I encountered more of it among minority groups in Missouri.
Interesting.
Than I did from like, I don't know, white people or, white American people, because I'm pretty white myself, but.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing too, right? It's like we're white guys, but you're Cuban, I'm Cuban, and it's kind of like, well, that's weird. That was like their thing,
right?
But Virginia is specific, right? Also, like I was in Southwest Virginia, which Northern Virginia and Southwest Virginia are like completely different worlds. When you go to Northern Virginia, it's like very, I'm not gonna say like modern, but just like, I don't know, way different.
Yeah,
way different.
So how would you define Miami culture?
I don't think it really has a definition. I think a melting pot of like a lot of different cultures is who we are. I think that's what makes us pretty special.
I agree.
It's kind of like what he was saying. It's like,
yeah,
there's so much of everything here. It's like,
yeah.
I don't see, like when I go to other places, like in Virginia, it was like legit. It was just like there was Mexicans, African Americans, and white people. And it's like that's it. And so like And then that was like the one Cuban, like me.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, we don't know where to put you. But here it's like everything, you know. And then I think growing up in that is a benefit because you get used to a lot of different culture. And I think from the food side, we've grown a lot. I know this is totally off subject, but it's like the amount of cultures that are here. You get exposed to so many different types of food, and now like you could really just get anything, you know, which is very indicative of like a big city that has that melting pot vibe, you know, in New York, Chicago, and stuff like that, LA. You get whatever, you know, Jamaican food, Haitian food, Cuban food, Venezuelan food, Nicaraguan food. You know, you can even go to Wagons West and get some biscuits and gravy. Okay,
that's true.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of times we fall into the trap of, and maybe all three of us have done it at different times, of conflating Miami culture and Cuban culture, right? But Miami is also so many other things. I think Miami can kind of, to the extent that like if you have to define what is Miami culture, and I think it's fair to do because you do it for other cities too. I think Miami can like more or less neatly be split into two things, and there's old Miami. Right, and it's like old Coconut Grove and that like old Bahamian thing. All of the people who were upset when the Cubans started showing up in the in the late 50s and 60s. Yeah. So there's that. There's old Miami, and then I think just broadly, people who are fleeing something, right? Because even among non-Hispanics or even like domestically, the influx now of like Californians and New Yorkers and whatever else, like, they're leaving something more than they're coming to something, right? Like you go to New York and LA and it's like, oh, I came here to be an actor and I came here to, to be in the restaurant business, or like people come to Miami. It's like, I couldn't take this and I couldn't take that.
Right.
Maybe you couldn't take COVID restrictions in New York, or you couldn't take communism in Venezuela, or you couldn't take, murderous, governments in Haiti, or whatever it might be. And I think that that's kind of the common thread. And I think it's where a lot of Miami kind of derives. It's like, and I know Dave Arvello, who was a guest on our podcast, has made this point too. Like one of the things that he's come to love about Miami and the time that he's been living here, which is like maybe a couple of years.
It's like a year.
Yeah.
For like a year. Is this sort of like anti-authoritarianism that even people in Miami don't necessarily know they have in them. Right. And so if I'm trying to define Miami culture, I think it's a culture that's, split somewhat evenly between like old Miami and the side of Miami that's sought some kind of refuge or fled something.
You're so right. I hadn't thought of it that way. I always say that it's like, the real U.S., the real land of opportunity, the real melting pot of what like the United States, the modern new United States,
right,
is thought to be.
Yeah.
But I like your definition better.
And the definition leaves some people out, right? Because there are people who don't fit neatly into that either, Right. But I think that there's a reason, not that people come and feel like unwelcome, but like Puerto Ricans, right? Orlando is a much more Puerto Rican town than say Miami. I think it's because Nicaraguans get here and Venezuelans get here and even Haitians get here, and they find in that broad sense like, oh, this isn't just an immigrant culture, this is a refuge culture.
Yeah.
Right.
Like we all came here for the same reasons.
Right.
And there's, there's room for everybody to flourish, it feels like here.
Right.
Like a bunch of our neighbors now are from California, Texas,
right,
New York. And it's interesting to watch them all flock to like the
they
city
connect
where the elderly would come die off.
Right. And they connect with that aspect of the Hispanic culture here too, right? Like the people get fed up with, let's call it, government overreach in the state of New York. They come here and no, you didn't just flee Castro's Cuba, but suddenly now you're looking at the world through this lens of like, oh, government affects my life. And this is a place where whether government here always lines up with it, right? Culturally, I think that's a value in Miami that exists in a way that it doesn't elsewhere.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And we saw that through COVID more than ever.
Right.
We went to see, oh my God, what's that comedian's name? The Russia guy? Do you know who I'm talking about? The guy that does his act without a shirt.
Oh, Bert Kreischer?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, The Machine.
The Machine, thank you. So
you ever seen The Machine?
No.
Oh, I'll send it to you. It's good.
You have to watch. It is, okay.
It's hilarious.
It's so funny. So we went to see him a couple months ago, and he said that in his stand-up. He was like, you guys just don't give a shit. You do whatever the heck you want down here. We're like, that's right. That pretty much defines us to a T. Right. So to segue into, you brought up food a few minutes ago, Mike, the culinary world here in Miami. How is that changing as we have this influx of everybody coming down?
Oh, you mean like from the people from other places?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's some people doing some good stuff, and then there's some people doing some like trash stuff. I think that I think people like the Simon Kims of the world that brought Coat to Miami. I think he's doing like really solid work. I think it's a concept that, we didn't really have anything of that style, and it suits Miami super well. And I think we had Simon on our podcast. Mm-hmm. That was also a very good episode.
That was good. He's super interesting.
Incredibly interesting. He still texts me all the time to have martinis, and he knows that I don't drink those, but he's like, let's go have
He's
martinis.
a martini man, for sure.
So, and like to his point, I mean, I think the first question I asked him was like, are you here to be a part of our community or to destroy it? Oh. And he had a good response. I mean, he had been here for, they had signed a lease like years before COVID happened. Now, other people from other places, I don't think that they're quite the same. And they've, publicly said like they're not really interested in being part of the community, or they don't really care like what vegetables grow here, or what farms have, or whatever. They're just going to charge a high ticket, and people are going to go eat their fucking bagels for $125. That's pretty much who they are.
You said bagels for $125?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a thing?
That's a thing that exists. So,
wow.
You could find the review of it on infatuation.com, written by another Podcon podcast guest, Ryan Pfeffer.
Oh, the old Pfefferoni.
The old Pfefferoni. So, I think the community is changing, but what I do think is that the backbone of the community, which are the people that have been here for a long time, that came up here or that left and came back or that are from here, I think they're all doing like really special work. And I think it shows in kind of the product that we're putting out there. As a city, I think that this food, like the food is pretty amazing. And like I said, from everything from mom and pop to like culturally driven restaurants like Cuban, Jamaican, Haitian, whatever, there's like everything now, and it's all good, and when you get to the chef driven restaurants, like you have smaller places now that people are going to. And I think that Miami has changed in the dynamic that they are focusing more on the local people than they did before. And I think COVID had a lot to do with that, because instead of like being like, well, there's this big sexy what's it called? Sexy fish place that opened up down the street, and they have shockingly a tuna tartare. Maybe we'll go to this place that it's a little Italian place, and they only have 20 seats, and the chefs Alex and Lucia are there every day, and they've been nominated for a beard before, and they crank out some of the best food, I think, in the state, on the East Coast, however you want to paint that picture. Maybe we should just go there instead. And I think we're seeing more of that, and it's to be said about several restaurants, So I think, how is it changing? I think that the community of Miami is becoming stronger, especially like the people that are from here. And then also, to the benefit of us, the people that are moving here as they're moving here for whatever, not to open restaurants or not to, they dine a lot. Where they're coming from, they dine a lot. And I think that that's great. And, we're seeing a different type of clientele also that also helps us do other things. And then dining alongside the Miami community, as we get to do more things and we get to push ourselves more, we get to put out more stuff and things that maybe Miami hasn't seen before. Like, I think the Ariete menu right now is probably the most progressive it's ever been. Nick?
On the subject of
Ariete's menu. I mean, you've been eating it for a long time.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I didn't know if you were like
I'm asking
me to address the question. Yeah, no, that's absolutely true.
Yeah. So It's good. It's a good growth. It's a healthy growth. I think that the food community is really accepting it. The beverage community is definitely accepting it because, people are drinking a lot. So, it's good. This is all good stuff. Yeah. We've seen a couple of I think the scene has gone through peaks and valleys in the last 30 years. And, I think that we're definitely in a peak right now. We haven't reached the peak, but I think we're
headed that way.
We're on that trajectory for sure.
Is there pressure to keep up with trends in the food
I don't do
industry?
Trends.
Yeah.
No, I have no interest in trends, but it's more like what we're talking about with the podcast. I don't care what other people are doing.
Right.
I'm going to do what I think is right. That's why I always go back to the tuna tartare reference because that's a hard trend. Mm-hmm. Wasabi, aioli, tuna tartare, some kind of wonton cracker, It's going to be in every cookie cutter or whatever the fuck restaurant, right? So, if there are trends, I don't know what they are, and I don't feel any pressure at all whatsoever. Maybe other people do, but not me.
But that's also, that's the brand that that's what you're offering people.
Right.
There are other places that people, this is not to extol the virtues of tuna tartare, but there's
some really good tuna tartare.
No, and
I'm not dissing the dish, okay?
And I think that it is possible to have a restaurant where the point of the restaurant is that, you don't want to be challenged. Mm-hmm. You go to Ariete and you're in for a ride.
Right.
You don't need to be on a ride 3 meals a day.
That's true, but I don't think Chug's is a ride.
No, I'm just saying Ariete in particular.
Oh yeah.
But even Chug's, I mean, what constitutes a ride is different for different people. There are people who want straight masita puerco. They don't want it to be pork belly.
Sure.
And there's a place for that. I'm just saying that it's not what you do.
Right, but I mean, there's also Chug's. Whatever. I'm not gonna get into this conversation, but Chug's has got a potato, basically a hash. Eggs and toast dish
with lechon.
No
lechon.
Eggs anyway. It's just.
Oh, I was thinking of the hash.
Is that a breakfast?
Yeah, it's just the that's not challenging. No. Pork hash isn't challenging,
but it's different.
But it's different. Does different mean challenging?
If I'm going to a breakfast diner, somebody just said, you want to go to a breakfast diner, and I say yes. I'm thinking corned beef hash. I'm not thinking lechon hash.
I find corned beef hash more challenging for me, just because I don't like it.
I'm just saying challenging conceptually. It challenges your presuppositions about what's going to be on the menu.
Got it.
Yeah, I don't mean challenging it's tough to get down your throat. I'm challenging in the sense of it challenges your ideas of what the meal is going to be. And from a comfort standpoint and a predictability standpoint, that's some of what people want some of the time. It's not a knock on that or a knock. For God's sake, I spend what little money I make doing this podcast at Mike's restaurants. So
that's not wrong.
Yeah. So it's definitely not a knock on Mike. It's just that it is a challenge in a way that I think people enjoy. That's why people go there, is because they like having. It's why people like good art. It's why people like it's why people love Velocipaster. Because it challenges your idea of what a movie's going to be. Mm-hmm.
Agreed.
You're the Velocipaster of Miami Chefs.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Thank you.
That is not what I meant to say. I meant you were innovative.
Uh-huh. Yeah. No, yeah, for sure.
Okay, just clearing that up.
Yeah.
So as you know, we are in essence a literary podcast. So I have to ask the question. What's your favorite book?
You want to go first? Or?
My favorite book that I've read, the easy answer would be Kitchen Confidential, right? Yeah, I've read that book a million times. The Devil in the Kitchen is probably one of my favorite books. And The Apprentice. Devil in the Kitchen is about Marco Pierre White, and The Apprentice is about Jacques Pepin.
Okay.
And they're just two very different lives, two very great chefs. So I think, good stuff.
None of mine are food related.
Shocker.
Well, I mean, whatever. It's I'm only food adjacent, right?
Yeah, that's right.
I don't know that I would put them in order, but Waiting for Snow in Havana is one of my favorite books by Carlos Eire. or Air. I don't know how. I forget now how he prefers to pronounce it. Big Trouble by Dave Barry, which they made, and I wouldn't say awful. There are worse movies, but it was like kind of a cheesy. It was a Tim Allen movie that they made based on.
I don't think I've ever seen it.
So it was supposed to be released in September of 2001, and it was a comedy about a nuclear bomb on a plane.
Oh.
So they like really delayed it, and then when it made it to theaters, like they gave it no publicity. They just like put it out there. But it's like a very Miami. If you read any Dave Barry, like imagine Dave Barry novel. Okay. So it's like one of the funniest things that I've ever read. I love Angela's Ashes by Frank McCourt. I actually just shipped that to a friend who had just moved to New York because she was asking for book recommendations. So I was like, here, have this, put it in a box of books. And outside of that, honestly, I read very little. I read very little fiction.
So you read mostly nonfiction.
Yeah. Which I guess Waiting for Snow isn't nonfiction, and neither is Angela's Ashes. So that checks. And then totally different kind of thing, but Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell. You a Thomas Sowell fan?
Yes.
Yeah. So Basic Economics is...
He is.
Yeah. It's like
that man is a genius.
Yeah.
Incredible. And what a life, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's up there. I would say, like, if anybody wanted to familiarize themselves with, like, title gives it away, right? It's about Basic Economics. He was basically a protege of Milton Friedman's. And so that's what that is. Yeah, I'm sure if I kept thinking, I would think of other ones, but those are like up there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Thank you guys for being here and sharing all your stories and wealth of information. And we'll make sure to have everything linked down below. And thank you to everybody listening and watching. Make sure to check out Pancon Podcast. And
bye, everybody.